Well, hello once again, and welcome to the Prince Magnum channel where hot rodding and romance do coexist. I'm your host, Prince Magnum, and this is another episode of Do It Yourself Budget Hot Rodding. All right, folks, we have been going on and on about the series Performance Not Included, and a lot of people are really enjoying it. A lot of people are enjoying learning about some of the stuff that went on in the 70s, and I've made a lot of references to the muscle car era of 1964 to 1970. And at this point, we really, if I'm going to talk about it, we need to really get into it. We really need to dive deep into it. Okay. So there's going to be some myths and some truths, and we're just going to kind of go over it all as much as possible. And I'm going to give kind of a warning. I know quite a bit about Ford. I know a little bit more about Oldsmobile and Pontiac, maybe a touch of Buick, but I don't know a whole lot about Mopar. But where I really know my stuff, that's Chevrolet. For those who don't know, I cut my teeth in hot rodding on Chevrolet. But amazingly enough, I prefer Oldsmobile over Chevrolet, ironically. Um, but that has a lot to do with the 70s. But anyhow, come on, what can you say bad about the old Cutlasses? I mean, come on, good looking cars. Anyhow, let's get on with this, okay? First things first. Um, when we start talking about there is a lot of myths about the muscle car era. First and foremost, um, we do not have modern muscle cars, okay? And I'm going to keep repeating this until people really start getting it. The muscle car era, got my notes. Muscle car era began in 1964 and ended in 1970. I know there was last gaspers. Those went on till about 75, 76, maybe if you really wanted to push it, 77. But for the most part, there was no more muscle cars after 1970. This had to do with the fact that leaded fuel was going away, emissions equipment was coming online, compression ratios started being lowered. Shoot, it was next to impossible to get a V8 with a solid lifter cam unless you got it in the aftermarket. Okay, muscle cars were going away. Okay, after 1970. So plain and simple, at 1970, that was the end of the muscle car era. Again, I know there was some last gaspers for a few years after that. Uh, each car company had their last gaspers, but officially there was no more muscle cars at that point. Okay. Uh, Here's kind of a myth that a lot of people kind of get wrong. Um, that all muscle cars had standard transmissions, and that's a total falsity. Probably the one of the most sought after muscle cars, or at least it was when I was a teenager. One of the most sought after was the 1970 Chevelle Super Sport LS6. Most people don't know this. They automatically think that all the LS6 equipped Chevelle Super Sports came with a 4 speed transmission. That's not always the case. Some of them came out with a 400 turbo 3 speed automatic, and the 400 turbo was probably one of the best 3 speed automatics that Chevrolet ever had to offer. This was also true with a lot of the muscle cars of the time frame. Um, Not all of them came out with standard transmissions. I say standard, manual, stick shift, whatever you want to call it. Not all of them did. Some of them had automatics. To give you an example, one of my favorite all-time muscle cars. I mean, and yeah, there was ones that had bigger numbers. I just like the look of it. The '66 Chevelle Super Sport. with the 396. Those came out with four speeds, but they also came out with two-speed power glides, you know. And the two-speed power glide is one of the toughest automatic transmissions. I know, and not all the time was it a four-speed. I know some Mustangs, with like a, depending on the engine, some Mustangs still had, three-speed manuals. Some of them had, you get the idea. Um, Not all muscle cars were standard transmissions. Also, while we're on the subject of standard transmissions, there's more than just four speeds. Chevrolet had several Muncies in the 1960s into the 70s. They had several Muncies, and the most sought after was the M22 Rock Crusher. That particular Muncie four speed, it was a close ratio pattern, and from what I have heard, some people say that going between gears, it sounded like you were crushing rocks, and it was about the only one that would hold up to the power that the 454 could put down. And it didn't matter if it was the LS5 or the LS6. That particular transmission was about the only one. It was also one that you could get in Corvette with the 427 in prior years. For those who like that information, so four speed, not all four speeds are the same. All right, moving on, onward, upward. Pony cars, pony cars. The first pony car to come onto the scene was the Mustang, basically, and then of course Camaro, Firebird, Trans Am. Those were later pony cars. What is a pony car? Okay, a pony car is a sports car with a 2+2 seating arrangement and had American muscle car engines offered. Okay, one of the finest examples that I could probably give you was the 1970, the 1970 Mustang, uh, the 302 Boss version. I think it was in 1970, or the 1970 Mach 1 Mustang. That had a serious muscle car engine in it. I know the Mach ones were offered with the 390, and the 390 and the 390 Ford was no joke. Uh, let's see, the 396 equipped Camaros, the 400 Pontiac equipped Firebirds and Trans Ams. Those were no slouches. Uh, Take your pick. Basically that was the pony car. It was a muscle car. It had muscle car performance in a sports car with 2+2 seating. Before that, the only sports cars in this country that was really offered was the the Corvette, and of course the T-Bird at one time was a 2+2. Well, was a two-seater. That was all you had. Was two-seaters. So now you had a 2+2 seating, and that was in. So do we still have pony cars today? No, we don't, because we don't have American muscle cars. In 1970, the pony car died out too. Well, Prince Magnum, they still make the Mustang, and they still make the Camaro. Yeah, they do. Those are sports cars today. Is there anything wrong with that? No. You have an American sports car that's still carrying on the tradition of the original pony car idea. It's just not a pony car. I'm sorry. And I know some people are going to come on, they're going to get really angry that I said that. But when we had a Mustang, it was a sports car. When I had a Camaro back when I was a teenager, it was a sports car. Okay, why do you guys try? I know some of you want to relive the 1960s, but it isn't the 1960s anymore unless you start bringing back high compression carbureted engines. Just the facts. Okay, so if you want a muscle car, build a muscle car. But if you're going to buy a brand new sports car, it's not a muscle car. And I know some people are going to get upset with me saying that, but I'm sorry. I mean, let's stop BSing ourselves, okay? All right. While we're on the subject of American muscle, let's talk about the fact that not all muscle car engines were big blocks. I know a lot of people automatically think, that when you say muscle car, automatically they think big block. Okay. For example, again, the Chevelles, the 454, everyone automatically thinks of it. The 420, the 428, 429, we're shooting Ford, the Ford 427, any one of those three automatically, they automatically think of those as in the muscle car era. Um, from Ford. You say Mopar, and immediately everyone says the 426 Hemi, and everyone forgets that there was some awesome performing small blocks that were offered from the car companies. For example, um, the I know Chevrolet had the 327 for years. You didn't get any better. As a matter of fact, there was one. There's still today amongst us old hot rodders. The most sought after 327 was the L79 327, and it offered 350 horses, 350 foot-pounds of torque. But what was so special about it, it was the first of its kind. It was a high performance hydraulic cam. Before that time, if you wanted high performance, you had to get a solid lifter cam. At 8,000 miles, you had to adjust the lifters in it. And after 100,000 miles, you had to replace the cam. That was a solid lifter cam. Well, now you didn't have to do that. You could run it for years. You didn't have to adjust it. And the L79 327 was the first of its kind. What was also special about it is the fact that that particular cam is the basis of all high performance hydraulic and roller cams today. It basically they all take their they all take their cues from that cam. Mopar's 340 was phenomenal, phenomenal. You couldn't say anything bad about it. Pontiac's 326 was awesome. Um, a lot of people forget Ford had the 289 that was just, I mean, that ran the Mustangs for the first few years up until like 1967. So from 1964 to 1967 was the best you could get was a 289, high output or hypo as they called it, and it was awesome. As a matter of fact, my dad used to tell me stories about him racing his '66 Mustang GT Coupe. Had a 289 under the hood, four barrel, and a four-speed, standard transmission. Um, Synchronizer was going out in second gear, so he kind of knew how. But it was one of those deals. He knew how to run it, and he was out running guys with, the 1970 Mach 1 Mustangs. He outran a guy with one had a 390 in it, and I mean, it was tough to keep up. And that 289, I mean, you couldn't say anything bad about it. A lot of people forget about those awesome small blocks. I mean, let's not forget, Chevrolet's 350 came online in 1967. The 283 was still around from Chevrolet. Oldsmobile had a 350 that was phenomenal. Um, Pontiac had a 350 that was phenomenal. These were awesome small blocks. And, you know, everybody forgets about those small blocks. Those small blocks did amazing stuff, and people forget about them because there was bigger engines offered at that time. And shoot, you know, there's even awesome big block engines that people forget about. Again, you say big block Chevy, and immediately everyone says 427. What about the 396, the 402, and let's not forget the biggest, the most unsung hero of the big block genre from Chevrolet, the 427. The 427 carried the Impalas. It carried um, the Corvette for many years, and that was a phenomenal performer. Um, and the best of those, there was the L88, the L88 427. Uh, it was rated at 435 horses, which is pretty dang good from the factory. But notice I said rated, advertised rated in this case. Uh, there are some estimates that said that it was putting out a lot more than that, somewhere up around 700 from the factory. So imagine having that in a little bitty Corvette in like 1968. You know, just saying. You want to die. Get a 427s. That again. And then again, let's not forget Ford had the 390 and the 460. I mean, a lot of people forget that those were awesome engines. Those were awesome big blocks. And let's not forget, you say Mopar, immediately everybody goes directly to the 426. And let's not forget about the 426 Max Wedge, which was an awesome engine. The 383 that came, that Mopar had to offer. That was a phenomenal engine. Then there was also the 440. The 440 was even better than the 426 because if you took the heads off the 426 and put it on a 440, whether it was the 440 Magnum or the 446 pack, it would stomp a 426 in a heartbeat. And a lot of people don't know that. Okay, but that's why we're talking about this. So again, I mean, you can say, that, oh, a lot of you young ones out there tend to forget that there were other engines that were just phenomenal, but a lot of people overlook them. While we're on the subject of forgotten engines, let's not also forget that there was a big block that Pontiac offered in the original GTO, and it was their 389 with three two-barrel carburetors, and that was, if you will, the original muscle car engine. But a lot of people forget about it. It's one of those forgotten to history engines. So if if you're getting in, if you want to talk about the muscle car era, there's a lot of history from 1964 to 1970 that most people don't even know exist. So while we're also on it, Oldsmobile's 455. I think Oldsmobile even had a 426 that was phenomenal. Again, Pontiac's 326, their 350. They had a 455 that was ridiculously powerful. They had a 400 that was awesome. Get to know the old cars like that, and I promise you, you'll be sitting there for hours on end. Well, shoot, I could, I mean, this is awesome. It's not just one select car. There's the muscle car era. I'm still learning. I'm still learning about stuff. Okay. Now, while we're on the subject, I mentioned leaded fuel. Um, Leaded fuel had its own high octane version, and it was called ethyl. If you watch some of the old cartoons, and if they have cars in there, I know there's one in particular. If you go search in YouTube long enough, you'll find it. But there's this little cartoon where it was about a taxi cab family, and the son decided he wanted to be a hot rod instead of a taxi cab. And at one point, he's getting ready to go racing around town, and Daddy's going to try to stop him. The wife says, "Oh my God, he's filled up on ethyl." That was the high octane leaded fuel of its day. So if there's any old hot rodders out there who remember ethyl gasoline, leave me tell me about it. Tell me about remembering that. Ethyl is long gone. Today we have the different, but if you've never heard of that, that's one of them. Okay, onward and upward. Covered that. Covered that. All right. Also, while we're talking about different engine packages, different. The 427 again was the most unsung hero of Chevrolet's lineup. Most people don't even know this. In 1968, there were several 427s. But here's an example again. I mentioned the L88 that was advertised at 435 horses. Most people did, if they heard 427 and they heard about one that was putting out 435 horses, they would think that was the only one offered in the 427, and that's not even true. There was two other versions. There was the L71 427. Had three two-barrel carburetors, 410 horses. There was another version called the L72, had three two-barrel carburetors, 425 horses. You're beginning to see what I'm talking about. It's not, and this was all in 1968. 1970, The 454 again, the LS6 we know about, 450 horses. But then there was the LS5, 425 horses. But then there's an even lesser known, um, LS7, 454, which I think it was like 465 horses was the advertised number, and it was you had to specially order that, and it was basically a racing engine only. So something to think about. You ever get a chance, look up those specs, and I promise you, it'll scare the crap out of you. You'd be like, they offered that again, just because you hear about one particular one doesn't mean that that's the only thing offered. As a matter of fact, as I was looking up the RPO codes for the 1968 427. As I was going through looking at some of the RPO codes, I also came across, and I should have wrote this down. I did not know this. Chevrolet had a supercharged inline six in the 1960s. Surprise, surprise! I guess I learned something. And it was I think a 255. I think it's the supercharged inline six from Chevrolet, and I'm like, wow, that was a thing, So little did I know the inline six had a supercharger at one point in time. You could get it with one. I don't think I ever heard of anybody doing it, but it was there. It existed. So there you have it. Okay. So in a nutshell, we covered there's a lot of myths about these old cars. There's a lot of people tend to forget that honestly and truthfully, the muscle car era was very large, very expansive. Okay. And again, we did have some last gaspers that lasted into the 70s. But, again, in the 1970s, you had to put the performance in. Now, that also being said, um, again, if you had a muscle car engine, most likely it came with a solid lifter cam, and we talked about that. Um, you had mechanical distributors, um, and something else that doesn't really come up very often. Even your heavy duty suspension and great, even in the 1960s during the muscle car era. Um, I think this needs to be said, and we'll talk about this more um, in another video. We'll have to dive into this because I'm getting to unless someone pops on, because kind of I guess because it's so late, a lot of people aren't jumping on that, and it's a Monday. But basically, in a nutshell, um, when you talk the 1960s, yes, the performance was awesome, but car manufacturers really started pushing that performance, and the suspensions were not able to keep up. Case in point, I have a step uncle who was sent to prison because he bought it was a '67 Mustang Fastback. I think it was a 67 Mustang Fastback, and the front end was getting kind of goofy, and he was driving it down the road. Ball joint broke. He lost control, and he slammed into a minivan, and basically, he killed somebody. Okay, um, because of this, uh, well, but he'd had a couple of drinks. Okay, he had a couple of drinks, and because of the suspension issues and things like that, which even my dad looked at it and said, "Don't buy this thing. The whole front end's screwy. This is going to break on you the first chance it gets." But he didn't listen. He bought it anyways, and when it broke, he hit that gal, and because he had a couple of drinks, um, even though he wasn't drunk, he went to prison over it. And it had a 302 in it. I think no, I forget what it had. I think it had it about 67, 289. It had been 289, and it was ridiculously powerful and basically killed somebody. So because of suspension issues. in the 1960s, you could still buy, you could, you could still buy uh, cars with serious performance. Say, some, like a Chevelle with a 396, you could actually get front drum brakes and manual, no power brakes and stuff like that. Stuff you're sitting there going, well, that wouldn't exactly be good to be putting on a car like that. Yeah, well, they did it. you know. So when with the death of the muscle car era, car companies started really working on their suspensions a little bit more, and they really got good in the 70s, which that's a subject for another time. So just because there was serious performance in the 1960s during the muscle car era and it ended in 1970 doesn't exactly mean it was ooh la la, if you catch my meaning. All right. Well, there you go. Before I begin rambling on, I want to, I didn't have anybody really view while I was working on this, but I know there'll be people who will watch later. So thank you right away if when you do. Um, be sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. If you've got a subject on this, for performance not included, be sure to leave that question in the box below. We're going to start answering some of those questions. Okay, so be sure to leave that question in the box below. Ask me your questions. Because like I said, the 1970s gets a bad rap for performance, and that's just not fair because it was there. You had to put it in. Okay. One of the next subjects that's going to come up is some of the downfalls of the 70s, and when you get your hands on one of the cars from this time frame, some of the things that you're going to have to do to get that performance back. Okay, so we're going to talk more about that in one of the next videos. We're also going to talk about in another upcoming video. We're going to try to get that walk around of Project Lena. A lot of stuff happening. So be sure to to hit the bell icon, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and hit that bell icon. It helps us out a great deal. And when you hit the bell icon, you'll know every time we go to fire up one of these videos. All right. As usual, get out there and work on a project, okay? Don't care what it is, just do something with yourself, Just do something. It's something to be said about doing something with your hands. Not like that. If you have a sweetheart, sweep her off her feet. Or him. It's a new age. But do something for your sweetheart, okay? I know Val. Thank you.